Joanna will walk what we've been up to. So Joanna.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy, and welcome everybody. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with us. We're going to be walking you through a presentation explaining a little bit about what the general plan is, what the alternatives process is that we're in the middle of right now. We're going to have 3 different breaks for your questions and answers as we go through this presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about land use alternatives in 3 different focus areas. I'm going to explain what those are, time for questions, and then land use alternatives in 2 more focus areas, more time for questions, and then a wrap up with next steps and closing remarks just at 1 o'clock. So about 1 hour we'll be together. During this presentation, we really want to answer any questions that you've come with or new questions that arise for you. Please do be listening to the presentation. We've tried to tailor this to answer some of the frequent questions that we've gotten through this process. So I hope that we'll be able to answer many of your questions before you ask them. But during the presentation, while you're listening, as you have questions, you can submit those in the chat. And if you have comments, ideas, suggestions, other feedback, that can also go in the chat. We will be collecting all of that. This screen shows you how to use the chat window. Please chat your questions or your comments to Carrie Stone. Carrie, say hi. Carrie is with PlaceWorks. She's going to be collecting everything in one place. So we want to make sure that everything gets to the right person. That's Carrie Stone. Please don't chat to me, even though I'm the one talking. Because I'm the one talking, I'm not going to be reading the chat. So do send those questions to Carrie Stone and we'll answer them as we go throughout the presentation. So as we get started, we want to just find out a little bit more about who you are. We always like to understand who's here. We want to see who's missing so that we can tailor our outreach efforts for future events and make sure that we're really getting a cross section of the Livermore community. So Lauren has launched a poll. You should be seeing 3 quick questions showing up in front of you. We just want to understand whether you're new to the general plan update process. We are very curious about how you heard about this event. We want to know what works and doesn't work. And just interested a little bit in kind of what's your role in Livermore. And we understand that you might have many different roles and many different ways of being a stakeholder. You might live here, you might own property here, work here, own a business, represent a neighborhood group. So all of those are different ways in which people engage with the community, and we're very curious about any of those. Looks like at this point, everybody has responded. Thank you so much. So for almost everybody, this is your first time joining us for a general plan event. That's great. Thank you so much. We're really excited that you're becoming part of this process. It looks like for many people, city email is an effective way of getting the word out, and social media posts. And then many of you are residents. I'm going to go ahead and share the results so you can see what I'm narrating here. Most of you, over 78%, are residents and over half own property. A couple people work or own businesses here and represent a neighborhood or a community group. So thank you for that. That's a great snapshot for us of how we're reaching folks and who's getting involved. So thank you very much. We're going to move on from the poll now and explain a little bit more about what is the general plan. And this will be, I hope, very relevant since it sounds like this is the first general plan meeting for many of you. So I'm going to explain more about what the general plan is, but I want to start by explaining why it matters. The Livermore that you live in today is the result of decisions about planning and development and conservation that were made almost 20 years ago when the current general plan was adopted. So that general plan was adopted in 2004, and it's been influencing decision making for almost 20 years about where the city is going to build or allow for building homes, parks, streets, which streets connect, the landscaping, everything else about how Livermore looks and feels is very strongly influenced by the general plan. And this is our chance to take a look at where Livermore is today and where we want it to be in the future, and think about making a new plan about what Livermore is going to look and feel like in 2045. And so that's why we call it Imagine Livermore 2045. So that's a little bit about the why. Let's say more about what it is. The general plan is a document that is required for every city and county in California, and it guides land use and development and helps the city plan for growth in a balanced way, while also protecting and conserving natural resources like our open space, our air, and our water. The general plan is really focused on the physical form of the community. And it sets out policies and regulations so that everyone understands what those are and that they can be applied fairly and consistently in all city decisions. So most general plans, as I mentioned, look out 20 to 25 years in the future. The current general plan, you can see on this slide on the right-hand side, had a planning horizon of the year 2025. And that's why we're starting now to revamp that plan and consider a new general plan. One of the first phases of this project that we have already completed was to develop a vision statement. And you can see that on the screen here. It talks about Livermore as a community with a big heart where families and individuals flourish. And we also talk about insightful land use policies and wise resource management. One thing that we heard a lot about in the visioning phase was the importance of high quality services and infrastructure that support a high quality of life for Livermore residents and a community that is safe and welcoming for all. So we have developed the land use alternatives that we're going to be talking about today as different paths, but that would all hopefully achieve this same vision. I want to note too that the vision is supported by several guiding principles. These are the things that we heard are important to many of you in the community. Principles like prosperity, housing, diversity, resiliency, and the arts as all being very important pieces of the community and of life in Livermore. And you can see the entire vision statement and all of these guiding principles on our website. The website is in the lower corner of every one of our slides here at imaginelivermore2045.org. Finally, a little note on the contents of the general plan so you have a sense of what it covers. The general plan is made up of chapters. In planning terms, we call these elements. So you might hear that word a lot of times in part of the general plan process. Many of the elements are required by state law. You can see those on the left-hand side. Land use, circulation, which means transportation or how we get around, housing, open space and conservation, noise, public safety, and environmental justice. Those are the elements or the contents of the general plan that the state of California requires. In addition, cities can adopt their own elements that are tailored to the unique conditions of that city. Those are optional elements, but they have the same weight and power as the required elements. Livermore's current general plan has optional elements that are customized to Livermore that address community character, infrastructure and public services, economic development, and climate change. So that's a little bit about the broader context of the general plan update. One important step of the overall update is the alternatives process, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that now. So there's a number of very important reasons why we need to plan for the future by looking specifically at potential land use changes in Livermore. One, of course, is to make sure that we're planning for adequate housing options. This is in part about being responsive to state housing mandates as required by the law, but it's also more importantly about providing housing for the full range of people who live and work in Livermore and that have full range of household types and incomes. Land use also has a very strong relationship to the city's budget and the city's financial sustainability. So we want to understand how different land use patterns would impact the city's sources of revenue like sales tax, property tax, and development impact fees, as well as the cost of providing public services. Livermore has long maintained a very strong goal to foster high quality job creation. That requires land to think about where those jobs are going to be located. And all of these things together will help us achieve the community's vision for 2045. One important piece of the general plan is the general plan land use map. And the city's current land use map is shown on this slide. So every color on this map corresponds to what we call a land use designation. And the land use designations say what can be built, where, and at what intensity. So Livermore's current land use pattern includes kind of a downtown core surrounded by residential neighborhoods with industrial areas and the labs at the fringes of the town. As part of the land use alternatives process, we're considering where and if some land use designations on the current map might need to change to better reflect the future conditions we want to see. Many of the general plan land use designations I just showed you are going to remain the same. They probably are still the right fit for that land, but we do think there's places where targeted changes are needed. And we've identified 5 focus areas that explore potential land use changes and think about different ways of accommodating jobs, homes, and services like parks and open space in the future. So we have developed these land use alternatives. I'm going to walk you through those in the next part of the presentation. And we're going to consider kind of the best ideas from each one of those land use alternatives within the 5 focus areas and pick and choose to mix and match to create one single preferred scenario. The preferred land use scenario is then going to be integrated into the overall citywide general plan land use map and will be further studied in what we call an environmental impact report or EIR. And then ultimately that land use map with the existing designations plus the new designations that are chosen as part of the preferred scenario will become the basis for the general plan land use map in the new general plan 2045 that is adopted. As we think about how the city regulates land use, it is also really important to understand that that is certainly not the only factor that affects what gets built and where in Livermore. City regulations are one very important factor in what influences development. But there are many other factors as well. So public investment, such as where the city might widen a road or extend a sewer line, for example. Clearly, that has a role on what develops where. The market forces from our national or even global economy are also going to influence what people would want to build, what's profitable to build, and what gets replaced over time. Those market forces are one of the strongest influences on private property owner decisions. But property owners make decisions about what to do with their properties for many different reasons. So just because we change the color on the land use map, it does not force the property owner to change to that development. It doesn't force them to change immediately. It is information about what is allowed on that parcel, but it does not automatically change the development of a particular piece of land in Livermore. And then finally, community input. We know that when this plan is being considered and deliberated, you will continue to have input on it. And after it's adopted, as individual projects are proposed, again, the community often has many different opportunities to give input and influence the ultimate outcome of a project. So we have been underway with this project, the general plan update overall, for a couple of years now. Community input has been a part of it all along the way. And I just wanted to touch on some of the things that we've heard already. Many people have expressed that they want to maintain Livermore's small town feeling. They also want to add a variety of more affordable housing types. Looking at vacant infill sites as places to accommodate future growth, continue to foster a strong local economy, add more parks and open space, as well as trails and bikeways. We've also completed a land use evaluation that can help inform our choices about the land use alternatives. This is again available at imaginelivermore2045.org. It looks at a range of different important topics and how the land use alternatives would perform in each of these categories. I want to be clear that we're not making any decisions about land use changes today or as part of this meeting. We're still continuing to collect input. And I hope that you will visit imaginelivermore2045.org to see additional information and future meeting dates. Very briefly, where we are in this process, we've, as I mentioned, identified the 5 focus areas and then developed land use alternatives for each one of them. We've completed the evaluation I was just describing, and now we're in this phase of selecting the preferred scenario, which is going to be going on for the next couple months or so, as it then will become the basis for the updated general plan and general plan EIR. So with that, we've gotten to our first break for questions. And I hope that you've been sending these to Carrie as we go through the process. Carrie is going to read your questions, and we're going to do our best to answer those for the next few minutes. Carrie, do you have some questions for us?
I don't have any questions yet.
All right. Well, that's okay. Anybody that has any questions, you still have time to send those in the chat. We do have a lot of information to cover today, so I'm sure that some of what I'm saying will generate questions for you, and we'll be happy to answer them as they come in. I'm going to pause and give folks just a second, see if anything comes in, but I'm also happy to continue going through our presentation. Getting anything, Carrie?
Still no questions.
Okay. I'm going to keep moving. Anytime during the presentation, you can use the chat function to send questions to Carrie, and she'll be collecting them. We're going to have 2 more breaks for questions, so we still have plenty of time. So I've explained a little bit about the general plan and more specifically this alternatives phase that we're in right now. And now I'm going to talk about specifically what the alternatives are and what our 5 focus areas are. So this slide shows you a citywide map of Livermore. Just to orient you briefly, here's 580 that you can see kind of going across most of the northern part of town. Downtown is about right here. So the colored shapes that are on this map are the 5 focus areas that we identified through an earlier phase of work and community input as the parts of Livermore that are perhaps the most likely to experience change over the next 20 years. Some of these parts of town have large areas of undeveloped or underutilized land. Some of them are served by existing transit and infrastructure. To that end, I just want to note that one thing that's an important factor in informing this general plan update is the fact that since the current general plan was adopted, BART has kind of made a definitive decision that they are not going to be extending service to Livermore. Some of the existing general plan was kind of built around that expectation. So this general plan update is going to be built around existing transit, including the ACE line, which you can see in the blue and the black, and a future rail line called Valley Link that will connect the Central Valley with the Bay Area. This green station and this magenta station in the Isabel area are 2 future Valley Link stations. And so that's a great example of a way in which we think change is probably going to happen within the lifetime of this general plan. Some of these areas are already starting to transition to other uses. I also wanted to note that we're not planning to reopen any of Livermore's adopted specific plans. So there's the recent Isabel neighborhood specific plan in the kind of northwest part of the city. There's the very successful South Livermore Valley specific plan that has addressed agricultural preservation in that part of Livermore for several years now. And we're not planning to change those. So we're looking for areas that aren't already covered by a specific plan where change is likely to happen and could be supported by existing or future infrastructure. I'm going to go through each one of the focus areas one by one and say more about them. But I wanted to also just orient you to what these maps mean that I'm about to show you. So this is one of our smaller focus areas. It's called Vasco Row. And this is I'm just using this one slide as an example of one of the alternatives. All the alternatives have a map with different colors, and these colors represent what we're calling place types. So in this case, the yellow and brown stripe corresponds to a place type for residential high density that you can see in the upper left. Whereas the pink and red stripe corresponds to mixed industrial, commercial, and industrial. And the red over here corresponds to commercial wine country, the red and brown stripe, and the green in the center is a park or recreation. So all of these place types and the corresponding images that illustrate them, as well as numbers showing the allowed density or intensity range for development, is available on what we call the place types menu. So that corresponds to each one of these maps and helps you visualize what the maps mean in terms of the colors. Again, that material is available at imaginelivermore2045.org. So this is just an example explaining what we're about to be looking at. I'm going to start talking about the land use alternatives with one of our smaller and simpler focus areas. This is the Vasco Row focus area. It's on the corner of East Avenue here and Vasco Road, which is here. So this is mostly a light industrial area right now. And the current general plan designation, which you see on the right hand of the slide, is light industrial here, and then agriculture to the west of, to the east of Vasco Road. That designation would change under all three of our alternatives. So this is an area that's already kind of started to change. You might be familiar with Wood Family Vineyards or Rivers End Brewing. So there's kind of an influx in this area of winery and brewery businesses that wasn't really contemplated by the existing general plan and its generic light industrial designation. So we want to be responsive to that and support the success of those local visitors by creating a visitor destination that supports production and maker spaces and also could serve as a gateway to South Livermore wine country. All three of the draft alternatives are kind of different versions of that vision. And we see this as a place that could accommodate events or sale of local products, not only wine and beer, but maybe coffee or cheese, having some dining and entertainment type of locations. So the Maker Village alternative on the left includes a residential high density component wrapped around Research Drive. And then the mixed industrial uses would be kind of consolidated on this other side of the road with a centrally located park. The production alternative does not include any new residential in this area. It would be all either mixed industrial commercial or this wine country commercial with the red stripes. There would be a small amount of new green space in this alternative. It's actually located on the east side of Vasco Road. And then finally, the wine country alternative includes residential medium density uses along East Avenue, kind of in the northern part of the focus area, and then more of the wine country production to the southern part of the area. This corresponds to, for every land use alternative, those maps correspond to estimates of new housing units, new residents, and new jobs that could occur in each focus areas. So in all of these bar charts that I'm going to be showing you, the light green or kind of beige color represents new housing units. The gray bar in the middle is the new residents. And the green bar on the far right is the number of new jobs. So as you can see here, The Maker Village alternative in the Vasco Row focus area would add the highest number of new homes and residents and the fewest new jobs. The production alternative, as I mentioned, doesn't add any new homes. And it adds the wine country alternative would add, but kind of between the two in terms of the number of both housing and jobs, with production having the highest number of new jobs. So let's move on to our next focus area. This is the Laughlin Road focus area. So this is at the Greenville Road or Laughlin Road exit off of the north side of 580. A lot of this focus area is outside of the city limits, but it's within the urban growth boundary. This is a case that I was mentioning earlier where the existing general plan was really based on the idea that BART was going to be coming and locating in this area, which is not going to happen. So that's time to reconsider these land use changes, which would have kind of created a new high intensity residential village and some mixed density residential neighborhoods out in this area adjacent to a BART station and BART parking lots. Instead, we are considering changes that under all three of the land use alternatives would preserve most of this area in open space. That's all of the green shade that you see here. So then closer to 580 and Laughlin Road, there's some different configurations of possible land uses. The open space alternative would add single family and high density multifamily units in this area, and then industrial and highway commercial closer to the interchange. The mixed use alternative would also add some residential. This lighter color is single family, the gold is medium density behind neighborhood commercial uses along Laughlin Road. And then the industrial alternative would have some medium density residential things like townhomes, as well as the dark brown, higher density things like apartments, and then industrial uses and more extensive highway commercial uses. So the corresponding numbers to that, the open space alternative would add the most new housing and new residents and the fewest jobs. The mixed use alternative would add the most jobs and the least housing in this area. And then the industrial alternative is at the midpoint of both housing and jobs compared to the other two. The next focus area is called the Las Positas Court focus area. It includes the area off of Livermore Avenue to the north and south of Las Positas Court. So this is what you see along 580. This is kind of all open space right now. This is right behind where the new Chick-fil-A just went in, for example. And it includes Arroyo Las Positas, which you can see here in the aerial. This area is currently designated in the general plan for open space in that northern undeveloped part and business and commercial park in the parcels that are on both sides of the Las Positas Court cul-de-sac. In this area, we're considering a vision that would revitalize the underutilized industrial office spaces in this area, facilitate some new housing development here, and improve connectivity to existing services. This is also one of the entryways to Livermore, again, being located right off Livermore Avenue and very visible from I-580. All of the alternatives would maintain open space along Arroyo Las Positas itself. You can see that kind of green pathway snaking through the middle of all of them. And they would all preserve the industrial or office uses on the north side of Las Positas Court. But the residential alternative would explore adding some residential low density south of Las Positas Court. The neighborhood center alternative would designate the area south of I-580 for potential agricultural uses. This could serve as vineyards or maybe be a visual gateway to the South Livermore wine country. And the mixed, it would have some residential medium density down here and neighborhood commercial along Livermore Avenue. And finally, the highway-oriented alternative would most intensify development in this area by adding both industrial and industrial office uses in the currently undeveloped space along 580, and really making this into a new job center in Livermore. This would also have the highest density of new residential uses, with medium high density along the south side of La Las Positas Court cul-de-sac. That corresponds to about 1,000 new jobs, and just a few new homes in the residential alternative. Similar numbers for the neighborhood center alternatives, a bit more jobs and a bit more housing under that one because of the higher density housing. And then again, as I mentioned, both the highest number of jobs and highest number of new homes and residents, as well as significantly higher number of jobs under the highway oriented alternative because of all the new industrial and office development that would be there. And with that, we've gotten through 3 of our focus areas. So it's time for a second break for questions to see if any have come up.
Yes, I do have a few questions. The first one is, a few of the scenarios show housing units close to the freeway. California says this is a health concern. Can a couple of the alternatives be modified to move housing units further away from the freeway?
Sure. Andy, would you like me to start or would you like to start?
Go ahead, Joanna. I think we're probably going to say the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, so there is definitely awareness in California that the particulate matter in particular from high volume roadways like 580 is a health concern. And so the tiny little pieces of not just the things that come out of our fuel, but also things like brake dust or tire dust, or little tiny microscopic particles that can get into our lungs and cause asthma and other significant health issues. So building housing next to high volume roadways is definitely something that requires significant mitigation measures that are incorporated into new construction for that residential development. And in addition, thinking about things like setbacks or vegetation buffers would also probably be important policy considerations to make sure that we're protecting the new residents of that future housing that's close to those roadways. And in addition, to answer your question, yes, right now is the time when we're creating the preferred scenario. And so suggestions or input to change designations so that housing is farther away from 580 or other busy roads is certainly a great example of the kind of input that we're thinking of right now.
All right, the next question. For the housing units added in the next 20 years, will the existing schools be able to accommodate an increased student population?
Great question. And I will see if Andy wants to tackle that, or
I'll take a start at this
okay.
one. So we work closely with our partners at the school district to tackle those types of questions. And we have a open campus district. And right now, the district has said that there is enough capacity, even with future housing projections. But that said, we work collaboratively to see if we can address other goals like walkability and making sure neighborhoods have access to schools rather than having to transverse across town. So short answer is yes, but that doesn't mean we're not exploring new facilities, and we're taking that input from the school district. And Joanna, you can add to that if you'd like.
Yeah, just want to mention again that that's an example of a topic that is covered in the evaluation that I referenced. If you want to check out the schools section of our report, as well as other sections at imaginelivermore2045.org. And it has, for example, existing enrollment and capacity at every school in the school district.
Okay, what's the assumed absorption rate of the different types of development and the timeline for the general plan?
So all of the numbers that I'm talking about are really kind of an end state of development. Because this is the 2045 general plan, we're kind of thinking about that as the year 2045. in reality, if you think back to that slide that I showed you about all of the different factors that influence development, a global pandemic or economic fluctuations, we understand that there's a lot of factors that are going to drive the pace and the timing of change that are outside of the city's control. And so, we use 2045 as part of our exercise for the general plan update, but it's likely that different land uses will build out at different times as the market changes. So in some eras over the next 20 years, we might see the strongest demand for housing. Housing development might happen most quickly. In other eras, we might see the strongest development for different types of job generating use and the greatest pressure and the most rapid growth in those. So all of the development that we're envisioning is going to be happening at different times and at different paces. So we're just kind of looking at a single theoretical endpoint of 2045. For these, you mentioned absorption. And so when I think of that, I'm thinking of, how much of this is likely to develop. And we kind of applied the same set of assumptions to all of the different land use alternatives that are just based on how many acres have this designation or this place type, what is the range of intensity that's allowed under this place type, and then what are the corresponding kind of numbers of population and jobs that would be expected to go along with that amount of development. For all of those categories, we assumed something less than the maximum because over time in most communities, it's not that every single parcel gets bulldozed and developed to the maximum envelope allowed. We know that there's going to be some variation. Some will be a little bit less. Some might be closer to the maximum. So all of them assume the amount of development that's allowed somewhere closer to the midpoint. And again, the realities of what happens in terms of markets and private property owner decisions, we understand will fluctuate over time.
Right. I have a question about Vasco. Would there be a pedestrian bridge over Vasco? And what about additional parking?
So I'll jump in on that one, Joanna. I think those are great questions about what the future of that area could look like. Right now, we're not proposing a bridge, and we haven't gotten to the granular discussion of parking ratios for these uses, but those crossing of Vasco, the appropriate amount of parking or just circulation in general will have to be talked about at a future point through development standards that live in our zoning code, or maybe even what we call a specific plan for that area, where we can get into those details. But that's the kind of feedback we're looking for to help inform those future discussions. I don't know if you want to add to that, Joanna.
Yeah, that sounds right.
A question about Las Positas. I thought the area north of the Arroyo Las Positas was affected by a trading development rights agreement and therefore was not developable.
So there is an agreement with the nearby developer between that developer and the city when that land was annexed, and the development agreement offered to dedicate that land to the city, and then the city would designate it as open space. So that adds another layer of feasibility challenge to one of the scenarios, looking at the most intense scenario. But that's something that could be worked through if there was a strong enough desire to do so, but it does add challenge and some uncertainty to the long-term feasibility.
I think, Carrie, let's do one more question before we keep going.
Okay. The area you are targeting has a large homeless population. Where do you anticipate they will relocate?
What is this one for?
It doesn't specify.
Okay. I think homelessness is one of those issues that we will have to address through policy development in our general plan. And this is a citywide document with a lot of different inputs from many departments from across the organization. And so we have our housing and human services staff as partners on this project, and any changes we make We want to be consistent with their policies and practices to help the unhoused.
Thanks, Andy. And that's a chance too for me to just mention that the city's most recent housing element, which is the piece of the general plan that deals most directly with homelessness and other housing services in the city, is part of this general plan. It's actually already been completed in order to meet state deadlines. So the city's most current housing element is completed earlier this year. And that's also available both on the city's website and at Imagine Livermore 2045.org. So those were all great questions. Really appreciate your thoughtfulness. And as we go forward, again, keep those questions and comments coming to Carrie. And we're going to have another question break in a few minutes after I go through 2 more focus areas, starting with what we call the Midtown focus area. So the Midtown focus area is along 580, and it includes a little bit of north of 580, including the mobile home park up here. It's kind of a triangular shape. It's got First Street, and then the train tracks, and then going over here mostly to kind of South Vasco Road. So this is a pretty large area, and it includes a mix of existing commercial, office, industrial, and residential land uses. A lot of it, as you can see from these building footprints on the area, is kind of low intensity industrial buildings. Some housing has already started to happen, like the Brisa neighborhood over here at the ACE station. And then there's a new approved housing project and on these vacant parcels. So we see that transition already beginning, and we think it's likely to occur and expand as the future Valley Link rail service comes into play. Right now, as you can see on the right, most of this area in the existing general plan is designated for various types of industrial or commercial or business uses. All of these kind of purple colors, the brown are where we have our more residential and locations under the existing general plan. So that would change under all 3 of our potential land use alternatives. Again, you can see the existing Vasco A station and the future Valley Link rail station in the red and green circles here, respectively. And in response to that transit service, all 3 alternatives are responding to a vision to establish transit-oriented complete neighborhood with a mix of housing, jobs, and services. So these circles are about a half-mile radius from the 2 stations. And you can see this brown color representing residential high density development is really focused inside of those circles in different configurations in all 3 of the alternatives. And the existing industrial development is really kind of preserved the most in the business center alternative, the least in the residential neighborhood alternative, and kind of in a middle amount in a slightly different configuration under the blended alternative. These alternatives also include things like new greenways and green spaces in different configurations in each. The business center alternative would include the fewest new homes and jobs. Well, that's not true. The fewest new homes, but still over 4,700 new homes and 5,000 new jobs. The residential neighborhood alternative, as its name implies, includes the greatest amount of growth for new housing and new residents, over 10,000 new housing units and about 4,700 new jobs. And then the blended alternative is between the 2 in terms of new housing, about 6,500 new homes. It includes the least amount of new jobs at about 4,100 new jobs. So that's the lowest amount, but still a significant amount of change under all 3 of these alternatives. And then finally, the east of Greenville Road focus area. This is number 5 of 5. This area is located mostly east of Greenville Road, which is here on our map. Oops, sorry. It extends from 580 in the north down to about East Avenue in the south. And this eastern curvy border kind of follows the aqueduct out here. This is mostly undeveloped. There's some scattered industrial uses and public uses like utilities. There's a few large lot rural residential homes. It's designated for large parcel agriculture in both the city's general plan and the Alameda County general plan. So this area is outside of both the city limit and the urban growth boundary, which mostly follow Greenville Road in this area. And that means that that's currently in the jurisdiction of Alameda County. And that's part of the city's interest in being involved in planning here, is to be able to have a little bit more say in what happens in the nature of development out here. This is mostly within the sphere of influence. You can see the sphere of influence line on our 3 alternative maps. So parts of this area are outside of the sphere of influence, this red dashed line. The majority is inside the sphere of influence. So we added east of Greenville in response to, as a focus area, in response to community input and city council direction. In particular, I've shown you a lot of focus areas within the existing city limits that we think might be places for future housing growth, which is a very important goal of the city, but which would also be displacing existing and future job growth. So we started thinking about where that job growth might happen instead, in a way that allows Livermore to continue to have a strong and thriving economy. And as you can see, all 3 of the east of Greenville alternatives are really focused solely on commercial and job growth. None of them include any housing designations. All of them are about establishing land uses to support innovation and technology-based companies in a complete district that really hosts a mix of different kinds of jobs, as well as services and amenities. And this would be a key part of the city's long-term fiscal sustainability, as well as serving as a new gateway to South Livermore wine country. So in all of these, this kind of purple color is a general industrial designation. The green is different configurations of open space, the lighter green color. The dark green color would be a new potential regional sports park, which is something we've heard interest in from the community. And this blue and red striped area is a new type of designation that we're calling research campus or education facility. That might be a type of facility developed in partnership with the labs and or universities to really take advantage of Livermore's unique positioning in that area. So, and then all of them also include a wine catalyst site at the southern end, again, to connect with agriculture and viticulture in South Livermore. So again, just for orientation, this is Greenville Road. This is kind of the extension of Patterson Pass Road. What do these correspond to? Our bar charts here are jobs only. There wouldn't be any housing growth under any of these alternatives. And the jobs would all, the alternatives would all add a significant amount of new jobs, ranging from a low of 9,300 jobs under alternative C, midpoint of 10,200 jobs in alternative A, and the highest potential for new jobs under alternative B at over 11,000 new jobs. And that brings us to our third and final break for questions. Carrie, do we have some additional questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions about traffic, so I'll read them both.
Okay.
How will kids get from some of these new housing areas to schools? Any chance they are close to existing schools so that kids could possibly ride or walk to the schools to reduce the high number of school car trips that could happen? As we're talking about increasing jobs and housing, is there simultaneous planning for increased traffic, both within Livermore and in and out of the valley?
So I think starting with the school trips, tried to touch on this a little earlier, that we have work with our school district. We look at what the capacity is for all the schools and then ask ourselves, well, should we consider new facilities to perhaps cut down on some of those school trips and make it easier for students to access school or educational facilities by walking or biking. So that's the ongoing conversation we're having with the district. And this is the time to talk about those things as we kind of start to reimagine some of the areas of our community. And then the second piece about jobs and increased housing, I'll let Joanna speak to this a little bit more, but that is part of the evaluation process of looking at if we add these new land use types, what does that do to our traffic patterns? How do we accommodate for that? And how do we plan for that so to make sure we have not only adequate roadway capacity, but other capacity for other modes such as transit, walking, biking, etc. So Joanna, I don't know if you wanted to add to that or the previous.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Way back at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned some of the contents of the general plan. Land use was one of them, but another one was circulation, which in general plan terms means transportation, means mobility, means getting around town, not just in cars, but by biking or walking or having access to transit. That is a required part of the general plan. So we're thinking about land use. We're very focused on land use right now because there's a lot of detail, a lot of nuance to this. And so we're focused on that right now. However, yes, we absolutely also have to do a step of thinking about how land use decisions influence the circulation network and vice versa. And in fact, state law about general plans says that the general plan's map of future circulation improvements has to be consistent with the general plan's land use map. So we're definitely going to be continuing to think about the transportation implications of these land use decisions as we get closer to a preferred scenario. And then we're going to be studying it all over again once we have a preferred scenario and when we do our environmental impact report and other types of transportation analyses for the general plan update. But yes, that is already something we've started to take a look at in the evaluation report, as Andy mentioned.
Next question is PlaceWorks working with Livermore's 2022 Climate Action Plan?
Yes.
And do the job numbers include those displaced within the existing general plan for the Greenville area?
The job numbers for all of the scenarios are net new. So this is really just looking at the increment of change that would happen. So it would include subtractions and additions of, all of them are a positive number, but that might include some decrease as land uses transition.
Those are all the questions I have right now.
Okay. All right, well, let's keep going here and talk about next steps. I think we might have a few more minutes at the end for some last questions. So if you do have questions, you can continue to put those in the chat. Again, or comments or ideas, we would love to hear those. So in addition to this meeting, part of what we're hoping to do is really offer you information and tools for giving us more in-depth input if anything here has sparked ideas for you. We have created at the Imagine Livermore 2045 website a preferred scenario online activity where you can spend much more time with our place types menu, explaining the different land use types, and the maps of each different focus area. So if I went too fast for you today, or you want to look into it in a little bit more depth, you can do all of that through the preferred scenario online activity. And you can go here and look at an individual focus area. If there's one in particular that's interesting to you, and you can drop a pin on individual parcels or locations within that focus area and really provide very specific comments. You can do that for all 5 of the focus area or just one or just a few. And if you don't have much time and you just want to answer some quick questions, there's also a way to check a box of which one is your preferred alternative or gets closest to your preferred alternative for each one of the focus areas. So that's all available at imaginelivermore2045.org. We're going to keep that exercise up through mid-December, through December 15th, to keep gathering your input. That website will also connect you to our email address that will come to the general plan update team. It's gpupdate@cityoflivermore.net. So again, any comments, ideas, suggestions, more questions, you can reach us there. We're gonna be having, what is that weird number? Sorry for the little typo here. Wednesday, tomorrow, we're gonna be having an in-person a community workshop. And Andy, tell us what elementary school that's at, please.
Croce Elementary School.
Thank you very much. That's an evening workshop tomorrow. And then on Saturday, at 10 a.m., we're going to be doing this same webinar again. So if you have friends or neighbors that might be interested, and Saturday is an easier time for them to join us for this webinar, we're going to be doing it one more time too. There is a general plan advisory committee of Livermore residents that's been meeting throughout the process. And they're going to be meeting again on December 13th. That these meetings are always open to the public. And then ultimately, we're going to be going to the Planning Commission for a recommendation, and then City Council for direction on a preferred scenario over the next couple months. So again, please check imaginelivermore2045.org for the dates, times, locations, all of the details and meeting materials for all of those meetings, and to sign up for our mailing list. And that's the most important information that I wanted to make sure to share with you today. Thanks to Lauren for putting the links to the online activity in the chat, and also to the website. So I think we've got a couple minutes before 1 o'clock in case there's any final questions, Carrie.
No questions, just a couple thank yous. And
All right.
A great presentation, Joanna.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And again, as the slide says here, we really appreciate you spending your time with us. We know that you have a lot of different obligations and commitments, a lot of different choices about whether and how to engage with the city and with the general plan update process. I hope this has been helpful. I really encourage you to stay involved. This is a very important process in shaping the future of your community, and your thoughts and ideas are really important and really valuable to us. So thank you very much for the time today, and I hope I'll see you again at future general plan events. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.